There is something magical about tiny doors. When I was a kid, I used to dream, heck, I still dream about crawling through a tiny door into another world. And I remember being jealous of our family cats because it seemed like they were having this experience every day of their lives. Just by being small, a normal suburban lawn probably felt like a prehistoric rainforest. And that led to my other childhood dream, shrinking myself down to the size of a mouse. Unfortunately, still haven't figured that one out, but I have learned how to build some crazy doors, like this one for my 3D printing workshop, which keeps out unwanted visitors with a secret puzzle lock. And now I have a cat of my own who likes to hang out with me while I build my projects. And, that got me thinking, maybe I will never be able to walk through a magical tiny door into another dimension, but maybe I can create that experience for my little wobbly cat.
Oh my God.
So when I say wobbly cat, I'm not joking or being mean. Penny has a mild case of cerebellar hypoplasia. She's totally fine, but it kind of makes her move like a cartoon character. And if you are one of 60 million people, you might have seen this video of her booping around the desert. So to make her magical life even more magical, I started by cutting a hole in my office door that I spent 2 months building, which might seem like an aggressive way to start this project, but before this, I made a template on my CNC, carefully centered that on the door, and most importantly, I'm designing the cat door in such a way that a slightly messy freehand jigsaw cut won't really matter. That's because my game plan was to frame the opening with blocks that completely cover the cut, but I didn't really know how I was going to do this, so I decided to start by building the tiny door itself.
So this is all of the Douglas fir I have left over from the door build, which unfortunately is not quite enough to build the cat door. And I really don't want to go to the lumberyard today, but I just remembered I've been saving the big piece that I cut out for the center ring, and it's already got all the texture.
There are few things in the world that feel as good as actually using scraps that you've been saving. And first things first, I had to make some cuts with the track saw so that I had a straight edge that I could reference with the table saw. I'm building the tiny door in the same style as the big door, but to keep the proportions looking right, I'm making the board skinnier. That big piece of scrap gave me a solid 60% of the material that I would need. And for the rest of the wood, I had to add back in all of that texture with one of my favorite woodworking techniques. I'm not really sure what this is called. I always say scalloping, but it's just using a power carving disc on an angle grinder, I'll link the one that I use in the description, to create hundreds of little divots. And after texturing those boards, I cut them down to the same width as the other ones, and it was time to glue all of these together into a tiny door. Those strips that I glued on the edges add a little bit of visual separation between each board, which is a look that I really like for textured or reclaimed wood. Kind of reminds me of, well, an old door. And while I was doing this glue up, I was trying to figure out how I was going to make that blocky castle door border.
This is what it looks like when you're trying not to go to the lumberyard so hard.
I've had these blocks kicking around my garage for years. They are pieces from a huge old-growth Douglas fir beam, beautiful wood, crazy tight grain. I used some of them to build wooden fan switches in the office door, and I realized that they would be perfect to make the border for the cat door. And bonus, I get to use even more scraps that I've been saving. So I was feeling on top of the world. Nothing could knock me down, nothing. And first things first, I needed to mill each block to a consistent thickness. I made this jig so I can put each of the 17 blocks in exactly the same spot and just run the same CNC program over and over, which was super satisfying. It's so fun to create a mini assembly line at home. And after a couple hours of mindless repetition, I was ready to cut out the 17 unique shapes that will form the border, and might not have had a bit quite long enough to cut all the way through these blocks, so I thought, hey, there's plenty of depth for the collet to hold onto. I can probably just pull out the bit a tad so there's enough cutting depth and everything will be fine, right? Yeah, the bit didn't fly out. That was a $75 router bit snapping because I had the smart idea to cut beyond the suggested cutting depth. So learn from my mistake, don't do that.
So I just went to the fancy woodworking store, spent $100 on this bit. Looks great, right? Well, I just looked it up. Turns out it's for cutting foam.
I decided to give it a try anyways, maybe it would work. It looked hilarious, but kind of scary, and the sound it made while cutting was horrible. The bit was also too long to use any dust collection, which was infuriating, and once the cut was finished,
that is one of the worst surface finishes I've ever seen come off the CNC. That is garbage.
this was quickly turning into one of my most frustrating days of making. It was like everything I tried, a new problem would rear its ugly head.
Well, this just popped off.
And on days like these, it can be so easy to feel like the world is against you and just give up or self-sabotage. But I've learned that sometimes the only way out is through.
Okay, got the dust boot set up, re-zeroed. Are we so back? I think we might be so back.
Sometimes you gotta put your frustration aside and, as Chris Hadfield says, work the problem. And while this ball nose bit isn't ideal, it'll cut all the way through, so that's one problem solved. And yeah, this piece cracked, but I can flush trim the part that popped off, glue it in place, and after some sanding, it'll be perfect for my needs.
Perseverance pays off. First fully successful cut.
After making my way through a few more blocks, I figured out that this reclaimed wood has some big cracks, which I just had to avoid in the cut path.
We do have exactly enough blocks. We have exactly enough blocks if we do 1 stone per block, but since I'm able to fit 2 on some of them, I have enough for a little bit of learning experience. Figuring it out.
In the end, a day that started incredibly frustrating ended with this huge feeling of accomplishment just because I had solved all these little problems. Quick side note, I guess I missed this nail when I was reclaiming the beams. Very lucky that the carbide bit was able to just go right through that. Anyways, you can see now why a ball nose bit is not ideal for this sort of work, but that paper thin raggedy edge cleans up very nicely with a chamfer bit. Okay, routers are scary. Good thing I had some extra blocks. Those ridges from the ball nose bit can be quickly eliminated with some 80 grit sandpaper. By this point, the glue on the door had dried, so I cut it to size, painstakingly sanded every one of the scallops as well as the blocks, and everything was ready for finish. This is Danish oil. It's the same finish I used on the door, super easy to apply, quite safe to be around, and it gives the fur this beautiful, rich color. In between coats of oil, I made this arch that holds an LED strip. I'm mounting that to the back of the door where it will edge light the cat door and really highlight that scallop's texture. And after 2 coats of oil, it was finally time to mount the blocks and bring this castle door archway to life. Now, right off the bat, I do feel like I have to address the elephant in the room. Yes, I am attaching the blocks to the door with hot glue, but this is only a temporary solution. Once all the blocks are in place, I'll nail them in permanently from the back of the door. And it was amazing to see this perfect archway come to life. As I hoped, my janky jigsaw cut didn't really matter. The blocks absorbed any slop in my cut, and right as I finished, Penny came over to inspect my work.
Penny, I'm about to use the nail gun and it's gonna freak you out.
In the moment, I had no idea that Penny had stuck around and she was watching me from the other side of the door, which doesn't really surprise me. She's been around since the beginning of my YouTube channel, back when I was woodworking on the floor of my apartment, which I guess is kind of what I'm doing here. So for Penny, it probably felt like the old days. It was so exciting seeing her walk through the arch for the first time, almost as exciting as driving my RoboVac through the door because woodworking inside gets dust everywhere, but that dust is no match for the Narwhal Flow 2. Now, Narwhal is the sponsor of this video, but I honestly love this product. It's like the nicest looking appliance in our house, and it's amazing for pets, especially since Abby sheds about 1 pound of fur every day, and she's declared war on traditional vacuums. The Flow 2 uses the Narmind Pro autonomous system to not only see what's in the room, but understand, using different cleaning and avoidance strategies depending on what it sees. That means we don't have to rearrange our furniture to vacuum. We can make dinner in the kitchen, and the Narwhal will work around us like a little robot butler. The Flow 2 is also a floor washer, mopping your floors with a self-cleaning extendable track mop and 140-degree hot water, which is amazing for day-to-day cleaning, as well as those times when I run out for a midday coffee, get a little too excited to get back to building, and unlike other mops, the Flow 2 isn't just spreading that coffee around. It extracts the wastewater in real time, so your floors are truly getting clean. Beautiful. Thank you to Narwhal for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description to check out the Flow 2. Now back to the project. Now to turn this arch into a cat door, I picked up some linear guide rails and designed these 3D printed pieces so I can mount the rails at 90 degrees to the door. These rails are super beefy. The steel rods are 20 millimeters in diameter. So unnecessary for a cat door, but ironically, they were cheaper than the smaller ones on Amazon. So I'd rather overbuild than underbuild. Now we gotta get the door installed, and thin strips of wood glued in this orientation aren't very strong, and they tend to warp like this. So I got one of these L channels, which conveniently has all of these holes that I can use to screw it to the panel, stiffen it up, and make it nice and straight.
That's what she said.
Now to mount the door to the rails, once again we need 90-degree mounting brackets, and I designed these ones so the door sits about 1/4 inch behind that LED arch that I built earlier. A little bit of distance will help diffuse that light, and of course, it'll just help avoid any scraping or interference.
That's pretty heavy. It's extremely beefy.
And to lift a beefy cat door, I was gonna need a beefy linear actuator. This guy can lift 200 pounds, and DC linear actuators are great for this sort of thing because they're super simple. You just reverse the wires to reverse the motor, and they're self-locking. In other words, the cat door won't fall down once the motor turns off. All right, so right here, I'm attaching a wire rope to the actuator with cable clamps. You might have seen these holding up telephone poles. Way overkill here, but in the spirit of overbuilding the absolute heck out of this thing, I thought I'd give it a try. I designed these 3D printed brackets to help lock the linear actuator in place, and I picked up these wall-mounted pulleys, which will redirect the wire rope down to the cat door, where it can conveniently attach directly to that L channel. Now, I was under no illusions that I would be able to get this cable tight. There was gonna be slack that would need to be eliminated in order for this pulley system to run smoothly. So I picked up a snatch block, which is basically a pulley that you can snap onto the middle of a rope. And I thought I was so smart, mounting it with a spring so it could automatically adjust to the tension, until I tested it and saw that it didn't work at all. Now in hindsight, I think this is the exact same problem that I was having with the chain tension on the big door. The snatch block adds tension when the cable runs in one direction, but it moves away from the cable when it runs in the other direction. And I probably could have fixed this the exact same way I did on the big door, by adding another tensioner that pulls in the opposite direction. But at this point, I realized that this wire rope cable was just so overkill for no good reason, so I switched it out for paracord. And the nice thing about paracord is you can tie it in knots, like this adjustable grip hitch. You can adjust this knot to get the tension dialed in perfectly, no snatch block required. And to control the door,
You know, I feel like I've been avoiding microcontrollers in Arduino for no good reason, and this might be time to actually do one.
how about no?
So I found this cool device that's pretty much exactly what I was looking for. So you attach the power input to one side, the motor output to the other side, and then you can use a remote to just switch the direction.
This is basically a remote controlled switch with the single job of switching the positive and negative wires of the linear actuator. Yes, I could have used an Arduino and controlled the door with a timer or a motion detector, but I want manual control over this door because sometimes Penny just wants to cuddle up in my lap while I'm working on my computer, which is so nice.
Penny can't jump up, so she claws her way up.
But don't let this cute wobbly cat fool you, because almost every day, between 1 and 2 hours before her scheduled dinner time, she will come into my office and meow non-stop at me to feed her, which is so annoying. So being able to close the castle gates while I need to lock in is fantastic. Now, a remote-controlled castle door demands some sort of hidden surveillance system. I mean, how will I know if Penny is waiting outside wanting to come in? And that is where this package comes in.
The question is, can you get like a camera in here?
Whoa. Yeah, I think you can drill out the people.
It's probably no surprise to some of you that this was heavily inspired by Mad Eye Moody's eye mounted outside of Dolores Umbridge's Ministry of Magic office in Harry Potter. I don't know, it just seemed to fit the steampunk vibe. And this 4-pack of acrylic eyes was only like 20 bucks. So I had so many opportunities to figure out the best way of drilling out the pupil as perfectly as possible so I could hide a camera inside.
All right, so I got a couple camera options. Number one, this rear view camera. Actually like approximately eyeball sized. Because we have the depth of the casing there, it's not gonna go all the way to the front. I'll be curious once we plug in the monitor to see what that looks like. But before we do that, I also got, I'm very excited about this. This was like $15, dude. That is a camera. It is literally the size of like my pinky fingernail.
Now, I did consider taking apart a smart doorbell so I could watch from my phone, but it didn't seem like this would all fit inside of the eyeball. Plus, it's just really fun playing around with all this outdated tech.
This is so fun. So the question, I need like a stand to put this on so we can, the question is, oh my goodness, so many cameras going on.
The backup camera fit inside, but the casing pushes it too far away from the hole. Plus, the wide angle makes this effect even worse. So the tiny camera, with its narrower field of view, is kind of perfect.
That is so cool.
The resolution is pretty horrible, but I don't care. This thing just makes me so happy. I took what I learned from my practice eyeballs and used a hot nail to bore a starting hole as close as possible to the exact center of the eye. But when you look from the side, the hole looks really weird, so I painted it black, which disguises it nicely as a pupil. Getting this camera in the exact right position was incredibly finicky, but I figured out that if I just kept it attached to the monitor while I glued it in place, I could get it in exactly the right position.
All right, as you can see, after much finagling, we got the camera pretty well in there. Tiniest bit of visible border around the edge, but it's kind of cool, kind of adds to the effect. Oh, maybe I should actually take that off. Oh yeah, there we go.
Now I'll be the first to admit that the eye itself was still looking kind of fake and plastic, so I headed to this awesome local antique store, shout out to Space Lab in Vancouver, to search for the perfect little metal tchotchke, and man, this store delivered. I found like 4 good options. This is what I ended up choosing, and I love how this looks. It's like someone is peeking through the hole, but the eye was set back a little too far, so I ground down this lip on the back, glued the eye in place, and after Eden was unexpectedly stoked about all this, I was so excited to see what she thought.
Oh my gosh. I love it.
Yeah, isn't it sick?
I love it. Does it move?
Nothing like an innocent comment from your wife to make you question your entire design.
I want the theme of this project to be, don't overthink stuff.
But Eden really wanted that eye to move, and option number 1 would be to rip the eye from the brass casing and add a week of electronics work to this ever-increasing side quest. But the thought of doing that made me nauseous for a couple reasons. 1, I'm not Derailed 3D, I don't know how to do that, and 2, I like how this is. So I'm gonna stop justifying my decision to go with option 2, my original vision of a static eye, which in my opinion looks awesome. But as you can see here, it's at the level to look at humans who want to come into my workshop, not cats or robovacs, and that was on purpose. I'm actually gonna have 2 cameras, one for the big door and one for the little door. I spent a while trying to get the wide angle backup camera to fit into an eye, but in the end, this is the best I could get. But a couple days later, Eden and I were hunting through another antique store where she found this.
Could the camera fit in that? That's not creepy.
You've been pretty into the creepy this project.
I have, yeah.
All right, so these are awesome, and I was originally planning on putting one on either side, nice and symmetrical, which is pretty cool, but I'd really prefer light sconces on either side. And check this out. How sick does that look? And imagine some light coming out of the top there. I don't know, I really like that. That's so cool.
Now the camera does fit perfectly in one of the eyes, but I don't really like the asymmetry and the angle is all wrong. But then I noticed that the mouth is just this indentation. It almost looks like it should be an opening. Plus, it would orient the camera perfectly while allowing light to spill from the eyes. I don't do much metal craft, so I was a little nervous to desecrate an antique, but this worked surprisingly well. And after knocking back the shine on that freshly cut brass, I attached an LED strip to the inside so that light would spill out of the eyes and the top. Now, getting this mask mounted to the door with the camera and all the wires was surprisingly tricky. I started by designing this 3D printed mounting bracket that hooks over 2 screws. I also printed this mounting template so I could be sure that the screw positioning would center the mask, and that worked great, but this was the easy part. To actually get the camera in there, pointing in the right direction took a gauntlet of drill bits, carving with a Dremel, and more hot glue than I care to admit. But in the end...
Dude, look at that. That is sick. Check it out. There we go. That seems like a pretty good angle for a cat. What do you think, Penny?
Penny was thinking that this door needs some sconces. A little lamp on either side would just complete the look, and this took me forever to figure out. I struck out at all the antique stores, 3D printed lamps just looked corny, but eventually I realized that the mask and the trapezoidal stones making up the border, this castle door was starting to look kind of Art Deco, so I whipped up these super iconic Art Deco medallions out of some Douglas fir. I think making these out of wood was the other key. Glass lamps would just look out of place. Also, huge fan of these custom mounting templates. I'm definitely making these for all of my projects going forward.
So I 3D printed these little standoffs. These are a 1/2 inch deep.
That will create a gap between the sconces and the door, allowing the light to create this really cool backlight effect.
It's gonna look so sick with the lights.
This hidden switch controls the lights behind the big center ring and the 2 fans. And I wanted to control the cat door lights as well, which took an entire afternoon of wiring to link everything together, but the final result was so worth it. But this tiny door wasn't done yet. The final step was running about 80 feet of RCA cables so I could watch the security cameras from my desk. And man, I gotta say, vintage tech is fun and all, but
I'm starting to understand why people were really excited about wireless stuff. This is ridiculous.
But after a couple hours of feeling like an IT guy from the 90s, I finally got the cables to my desk where I could set up my little surveillance system using this box, which switches between inputs so I can monitor both the human camera and the cat/robot camera. Even with all these switches, there's actually no on-off switch, but if you open up the switch box, you can see that most of it is empty space. So I drilled a hole in the casing, wired in this brass toggle switch, and right here is the perfect amount of space for the remote, which slides off the moment you bump the desk. That's easily fixed with a bit of Velcro, and I know this thing is janky, but honestly, it's like my favorite part of this project.
So Penny is currently upstairs, and I think she's a little freaked out by the door. There's been a lot going on, a lot of noise, so I'm gonna try to lure her with a little catnip.
While I was down on the floor playing with Penny, it got me thinking. I've been feeling a little lost these days, a little caught up in my adult anxieties. And at times it was actually difficult to work on this project because it didn't seem as grand as other things I've built. And it's not. It's a tiny door. But when you build something small, it reminds you of how magical the world looks when you're a kid. And when you grow up, that magic is still there. Sometimes you just gotta get down on the ground to notice it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, consider subscribing. As always, special thank you to my top supporters on Patreon, Paige Arlt, Sawyer, and my mom, Kathy Kerr. Love you, Mom.